Hey, and we're back. And we are doing Lesson 2, Chapter 1, Part 2. And this is Warren County PCB Landfill. Oops, sorry, my eye itches. As always, I'm going to go ahead and put the end notes for what I'm reading in the comment section below. I have divided chapter 1 into 3 guided readings. This is the second one because chapter 1 is discussing different landmark court cases that highlight the concept of environmental racism. It's taking a minute to load. So, and listen. She has like a wonderful index. As the chapters go, I highlight the courses that they talk about, and then I put them, the entire citation, in the comments so that you have the power and the capability to go and research everything that I'm talking about. That way you don't think that I'm lying to you. Okay, so there we go. Warren County. PCB contamination. Though the Triana case was compelling, it was the events that occurred in Warren County, North Carolina that changed everything. That is, the images of black protesters laying face up across a rural road while a large dump truck filled with PCB laced dirt inched towards them. That garnered much more interest and shocked the nation. In 1982, residents of the predominantly black Warren County, North Carolina, began protesting the construction of a chemical waste landfill near Afton, AFTON, in which the state planned to bury 400,000 cubic yards of soil tainted with PCBs. Labalme, L-A-B-A-L-M-E, 1988, footnote. The contamination occurred when the contractor, Robert Burns, and his 2 sons, hired by Robert Ward of the Ward Transformer Company of Raleigh, North Carolina, to dispose of hazardous wastes, sprayed approximately 12,850 gallons of PCB-tainted fluids along 210 miles of roads at 51 different sites in 14 counties in North Carolina in 1978. Ward Transformer bought, stored, rebuilt, and resold used electrical equipment, including transformers. United States versus Ward, 1984-1985, footnote. At first, Burns was paid $1.70 per gallon to remove the adulterated fluids from Ward's Transformers facility and ship them to Youngsville, Pennsylvania, warehouse for storage. When this proved too costly, Burns and Ward changed plans 3 months into operation and decided to dump the remainder of contaminated oil somewhere remote. They conjured up a plan to dispose of the oil at Fort Bragg's impact range. 2 truckloads were dumped at Fort Bragg in late June 1978. However, Burns and Ward decided to dump the rest of the contaminated oil elsewhere because the truck was getting stuck in the sandy soil at Fort Bragg, and the oil was not readily absorbed by sand. Consequently, the 2 conspired to spray the contaminated fluids along remote rural roads. Court cases. United States versus Ward, 1982b. United States versus Burns, 1986, footnotes. All the modifications needed for the truck to carry out the operation were done at the Ward Transformer facility with the aid of company employees. PCB-laced fluids were dumped from an enclosed truck outfitted with a 750-gallon tank and piping connected to a nozzle which extended from the rear right side of the truck. The nozzle was open to allow fluids to escape while the truck was in motion. United States versus Ward, 1985. Warren County versus North Carolina, 1981. In July and August, Burns and his sons sprayed the contaminated fluids along secluded roadways in eastern North Carolina. The spill was first discovered at Fort Bragg, when discolored grass and stained earth was noticed along 11 miles of roadway. Similar discoloration was spotted later on rural roadways in eastern counties. Tests of soil samples showed that the concentration of PCBs was as high as 14,800 ppm in some samples, parts per million. Once the contaminated soil was discovered, the state considered several plans before deciding to bury the soil in a landfill. The state evaluated 90 sites in 20 counties as potential disposal sites before settling on the Warren County site. Many of the sites were ruled out because they did not meet 2 EPA criteria. The bottom of the landfill should be at least 50 feet above the groundwater level, and the site should have thick, relatively impermeable soil formations such as large area clay pans. The chosen landfill site, located about 3.5 miles south of Warrenton and about 2.5 miles north of Afton, is a rural agricultural area. December 1978, North Carolina applied for approval for the site to be used as a landfill. A public hearing attended by hundreds of residents was held in January 1979 in Warrenton. 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 I know there's not 9 there. Huh. At the meeting, the state requested that the EPA waive 3 of its regulations. The requirement that groundwater be at least 50 feet below the landfill bottom. The groundwater was 7 feet below the surface at this chosen site that we're talking about. The need for an artificial liner. The state argued that soil compaction would be enough to prevent leaks. And the need for an underliner collection system. When residents voiced their concerns about the site, the state was ordered to conduct further soil tests. The results of the tests were submitted to the EPA in March. The Warren County site was approved on June 4th, 1979. Footnotes: Warren County versus North Carolina, 1981, Twitty versus North Carolina, 1987, and LeBaum, 1987. Activists hired their own consultant, Dr. Charles Mulchi, Mulchi, a soil expert from the Department of Agronomy at the University of Maryland. Mulchi argued that the soil at the Warren County site did not meet compaction criteria, as it would not form a protective layer when compressed. He also argued that the kaolinite, Kaolinite, it's a soil clay mixture, found at the selected site had high chemical exchange capacity. LeBlanc, 1987, and Exchange Project, 2009. Those are the 2 footnotes related to that statement. Residents were also concerned about the landfill because PCB is known to cause cancer and other illnesses. Despite opposition to the landfill, Governor Hunt framed the sitting of the landfill as a public good and assured residents that the health of North Carolinians would be safeguarded in the finest manner possible. Seeking to assure residents that the site would employ the best available technology in landfill design, state and EPA officials referred to the facility as the Cadillac of landfills. Stocking, 1993. Opposition to the landfill. Opponents of the plan to bury waste in the Warren County site filed 2 lawsuits in 1979 to halt plans for the landfill. One lawsuit was filed by landowners living adjacent of the landfill site. That's Twitty versus North Carolina, 1981. And the other by the Warren County Board of Commissioners and County Manager, and that was Warren County versus North Carolina, 1981. Warren County argued that the disposal of the PCBs in the landfill was a public nuisance, and that the process by which the site was approved was defective, as it allowed impermissible waivers of EPA regulations. The county questioned the timing of the preparation of the environmental impact statement and the level of detail it contained about the landfill design. The county also argued that the decision to establish the landfill was arbitrary and capricious. The county, which passed a law banning the disposal of PCBs within the limits on August 21st, 1978, argued that the plan to dump PCB-tainted soil in Warrenton violated its ordinance. In enacting the ordinance, the county noted that the area was particularly unsuited for the deposition of PCBs because there is a generally high water table in the county, and most of the soils of the county are highly permeable, so that there is a substantial likelihood that if stored or disposed in the county, PCBs would eventually seep into the groundwater supply. The court, relying on EPA documents, struck down the Warren County ordinance by arguing that those states and local jurisdictions had some discretion on imposing more stringent disposal guidelines, that those in federal agencies, states, or local jurisdictions could not take action that would stymie the national goal of properly disposing of hazardous chemical substances. It would be a matter of national concern if states refused to share the national responsibility for finding safe means for the proper disposal of hazardous substances. The landfill site was designed so that excavation for the disposal site was no closer than 7 feet above the water table, and the contaminated soil at least 15 feet above the high groundwater mark. A leachate detection system would be put in place, as well as both an artificial and compacted clay liner. After the PCB tainted soil was buried, the landfill would be capped with 3 feet of compacted soil, an artificial liner, and a foot of topsoil. The case was decided in November 1981. The court ruled in favor of the defendants, the state of North Carolina. It argued that the environmental impact statement was in order, as it provided enough details of the landfill design and the statutory and regulatory requirements were met by the state. I'm sorry, I don't know why my nose is itching so much. I lost my place. Meh. It argued that the environmental impact statements was in order, as it provided enough details of the landfill design and the statutory and regulatory requirements were met by the state. The district court also ruled against the plaintiffs in another case, the Twitty versus North Carolina, that made arguments similar to those made by Warren County. The plaintiffs argued that the bottom of the landfill should be at least 50 feet from the historical high water mark. The court rejected the plaintiff's argument, claiming that instead the design of the landfill would be adequate to protect public health. The court came to this conclusion because it felt that since the landfill is located on a ridge that is above a 100-year-old flood level, the bottom of the waste would be a minimum of 10 feet above seasonally high waters. The NAACP also filed a lawsuit in 1982 that explicitly linked race to the exposure of environmental hazards. The organization argued that the driving force behind the decision to construct the landfill near Afton was the fact that the community was predominantly black, rural, and poor. However, District Court Judge W. Earl Britt disagreed. He contended there is not one shred of evidence that race has at any time been a motivating factor for any decision taken by any official, state, federal, or local, in this long saga. This was a court case, NAACP versus Gorsuch, 1982, Gorsuch. The state acquired 142.3 acre tract of land from Warren County residents Carter and Linda Pope, on which it built a 19.3 acre landfill to bury the 40,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil. In response to citizens concerned about future landfill expansion, the county reached an out-of-court settlement with the state in which the county acquired the deed to the remainder of the property. There is also a restrictive covenant on the landfill site that bars any other kind of hazardous or radioactive waste from being disposed at that site. At the time the site was chosen, Warren County had the highest percentage of blacks in any county in the state. It was also one of the counties with the lowest income. Warren County was 60% black, and the unincorporated Shoko Township, in which the landfill was located, was 66% black. Yet blacks constituted only 22% of the state's population. Warren County was one of the 4 poorest counties in the state. The dumping and capping took place quickly. Wastes began arriving at the landfill on September 15th, 1982. By then, activists had organized an environmental group, the Warren County Citizens Concerned About PCBs. 500 protesters met the first truck at the Coulee Springs Baptist Church in Afton. 55 people were arrested on the first day of protests by state patrol officers dressed in full riot gear. The protests received national attention. Army troops from Fort Bragg were also called in to quell the 6 weeks of protests, in which 523 adults and children were arrested, including the congressional delegate from Washington, D.C., Walter Fauntroy, Fauntroy, and members of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. There's a bunch of court cases on that. The Twitty versus North Carolina, Warren County versus North Carolina, United States versus Ward. Thompson, 1998, LeBlanc, 1988, New York Times, 1982 2A, 1982 2B, and 1982 2C. All footnotes that are associated with that with that summary. These protests made headline news, and the pictures of residents blocking the road by laying down across it were printed in leading newspapers. The last of 7,000 truckloads of tainted soil arrived at the landfill on October 27th, and the landfill was capped by late November of that year. Even before the landfill was capped, there were signs of trouble. Heavy rains from the hurricane caused erosion and the accumulation of about 500,000 gallons of water at the site before the capping was concluded. 3 months after the site was capped, residents photographed gas bubbles in the liner. They also reported a gurgling sound coming from the landfill. Problems continued to surface at the landfill, and the parties fought for a long time about the additional remediation costs. By 1993, about 1.5 million gallons of water was trapped in the landfill. Warren County residents demanded and got the government to remediate problems at the site. Leavenworth, 1993, and the Exchange Project, 2006. Criminal charges and cleanup costs. Criminal charges were filed against the Burnses and the Ward Transformer Company. Robert Burns confessed to dumping the contaminated fluid along roadways and was arrested on January 22, 1979. Robert Ward was indicted by federal grand jury on 8 counts of knowingly and willfully causing PCBs to be disposed of illegally. He was convicted on all 8 counts. In May 1981, Ward's conviction was upheld by the Court of Appeals in 1982. The U.S. Supreme Court denied Ward's petition to hear the case in 1982. In January 1982, the federal government brought suit against Robert Ward and the Ward Transformer Company to recover expenses incurring in the PCB cleanup. The state intervened in the case to recover its cleanup costs from the Ward Transformer Company. Also, funding for the cleanup was provided from the EPA's Superfund program, which came about through the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, or CERCLA, CERCLA, of 1980, and state funds. In all, $2.4 million was taken from the Superfund Trust to cover the cost of cleanup. In addition, the U.S. Army spent $430,000 to remove contaminated soil from Fort Bragg, and North Carolina spent $450,000 on the cleanup. The case against the Ward Transformer was finally settled in 1985. The court found that the company was liable for the cleanup costs. Studies commissioned. During the protest, activists claimed that the landfill site was chosen because the township in which it was located was predominantly black. Though activists did not succeed in blocking the landfill, their organizing led to important outcomes. They formed an effective environmental justice organization. They also formed a voter registration foundation that resulted in Warren County becoming the first county in North Carolina where a majority of the members of the board of the county commissioners were black. Activists and protesters, including Representative Walter Fauntroy, also wondered whether the sitting of the facility was a fluke or whether there was a tendency to cite hazardous facilities in minority communities. The question led to the commissioning of 2 reports to examine the relationship between race, class, and the sitting patterns of hazardous facilities. The first study, conducted by the U.S. General Accounting Office, GAO, focused on the southern eastern United States. USGAO 1983 footnote. And the second, conducted by the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. There was a national study, the UCC 1987 footnote. Both of these widely cited studies had a significant impact on mobilizing minority communities to organize around environmental issues and on the growth of the on the growth of the environmental justice movement. They were among the earliest studies to link race with the increased likelihood of living close to hazardous facilities and toxic waste sites. Unlike other early studies in the genre, they were widely circulated among minority activists in minority communities. And then that is the end of part 2, talking about Warren County and the PCB landfill. Part 3 is going to be Cancer Alley. I want to go ahead and pause right now. And so, talking about, I'm going to find these 2 studies that I just now mentioned, and I'm going to find a way to make them available to you. They sound really interesting. I'd actually really like to see what they said. Get more into the details. But so, I just want to take a quick minute, and I want to kind of take what we've read, and I would like to relate it to issues that are happening right now. So we just had the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, Florida, and Texas. Puerto Rico hasn't gotten a lot of help at all because they are mainly a brown community. I mean, that's really why they haven't gotten that much help. I mean, honestly. Also, in Miami and in Houston, there were still black and brown communities that were struggling and in need of help, and help never came. They were too worried about the white folks. And then also, when you look at the Texas coast and you look at like refineries, the people who live around those refineries are poor whites and black and brown folk. Anytime that there's a refinery or some form of environmental monstrosity that's out there, that's where you're all around that area is where you're going to find all your poor whites and your black and brown folks. And also think about Standing Rock, North Dakota. They were going to put that oil pipeline directly through Bismarck, but because it was a predominantly white community, they shut that down real fast and they put it through an Indian reservation. That was all illegal because that was the Native Americans' land through the Fort Laramie Treaty. So things like this are happening right now. They've always happened, and if you look, no matter what city or state you're in, find your city, and because I live in a large city, and then go and find like all your kind of hazardous sites, if you got a refinery, if you got, anything, and then look around the neighborhoods around them. You're going to notice things. So anyway, coming back with part 3's, soon.